Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Right, so Variant 7 hasn't been out for even a week yet, but yesterday I did upload a full chapter 1 exploration guide, and as promised today we are going to be getting to chapter 2. Right, so we are going to start with quest 2.1, but before I actually break down every single path, I am gonna go and point out all of the individual MVPs that I personally ended up using that I think are the most effective champions in this chapter in general. Now, in skill class, we actually do not have too bad of a situation. There are plenty of worthwhile skill champions. There is Aegon hiding in the corner as well. Once again, let me fix this up a bit. Yeah, this is better. Right, so we have Aegon, which can be used, but I'll be honest, I didn't use him too much. My personal MVPs were obviously Nick Fury. I actually ended up using 2 Nick Furies for a lot of this stuff because they are fairly specific requirements that too many champions didn't fit as well. Then we have Black Widow Deadly Origins, who can put in some work, but is still not quite like ideal option. I think the following best options were Falcon, which unfortunately I do not have ranked up, and then Elsa Bloodstone. So in skill class, 3 MVPs definitely would be Nick Fury, Falcon, and Elsa Bloodstone. And then we also obviously have Night Rusher who can put in quite decent amount of work. Unfortunately, there are a lot of mediocre skill champions as well, but I do firmly believe that Ronin, Gwenpool, Deadwill, Hell's Kitchen, and as I said before, Aegon, perhaps even Blade, can put in some solid amount of work. But tech class is not really doing that well overall. The entire weight of tech nodes was pretty much carried by 2 champions for me personally, which was Warlock and Hulkbuster, 2 by far the biggest MAPs. Then we have Guardian, who also did a couple of fights, and I am fully willing to assume that Stark Hand Spider-Man can actually put in quite a decent amount of work as well. Silver Centurion's not really out, Visions perhaps, but yeah, the tech class isn't really doing that great. I have heard some good things about Howard the Duck though. Right, but let's get to actually breaking down each path. I'm not going to talk too much about the path on the right side. There's nothing too crazy node-wise to deal with, nothing really hindering you besides the physical resistance, but critical hits bypass physical resistance, energy hits obviously bypass physical resistance, and damage over time effects bypass physical resistance. And luckily for us, almost all tech and skill champions that you would consider using have access to either high crit rates or damage over time effect. My personal MVPs largely were again Warlock and Hulkbuster. For most part, I didn't bother using too many different options, but I'm sure you can. There is another thing, thanks to this stack overflow node, if you do fill your entire team with tech champions using either Hulkbuster or using Stark Enhanced Spider-Man, you can pretty much stunlock the opponents, and that is something definitely worth noting because your increased stat duration lets you get in extra hits. And thanks to that, especially if you do have a couple of power against synergies on your team, you can pretty much cheese throughout 90% of the fights there by keeping your opponent stun locked, just like you could with Stark Enhanced Spider-Man in tech variant. So that's worth to know. Let's move on to the left side. There's one quick side note. The trickiest fight is Wolverine Weapon X. And the key to fighting Wolverine Weapon X is just to focus on whenever he will reach 25 charges is when he's going to be unblockable and unstoppable. Unstoppable will expire relatively quickly. Unblockable will remain for a prolonged period of time, especially if you keep landing hits on him. Therefore, past that point, you will largely be relying on intercepts. But that unstoppable, just wait it out and then fight him as an unblockable foe, and you're just going to be fine. The key there is to keep an eye on his charges, and whenever he would reach 25, that's when the shenanigans happen. Next, Lane, Flare, and Spite. It's actually very simple. It was quite quick. Thanks to Flare, obviously, you do end up losing significant amounts of health, so you do have to be aware of that, and you want to use champions with high damage output and just get through the fights as quickly as possible. Once again, champions like Hulkbuster, who has regeneration, Nick Fury, who has double extended life, will be super useful. Blade probably can work relatively well as well here. Other than that, any specific fights, obviously against Havoc, ideally you want somebody with armor up, i.e. Hulkbuster for Warlock. I'm going to say those two names a lot in this quest. And then we have Guillotine 2099, where Nick Fury can bypass miss and works fantastic, but if I remember correctly, I just ended up using something like Hulkbuster, and I threw a lot of heavy attacks. When you knock her down, her invisibility DG cloak is disabled, and then obviously you just end up trying to finish the fight as quickly as possible, bait out the special attacks. But Spite itself, without any additional increase in power gain, really isn't that bad to deal with, and I didn't really find myself needing much of power control. Obviously, it was nice to have, therefore perhaps Darkenhand Spider-Man can come very much in handy in some of these fights, because you can just stun the opponent to level 1, drop a heavy attack, and then you can have time to bait out that special attack. Right, moving on to the left side further, we have Physical Perfection, so ideally use Skill Champions, Bleed, Vulnerability, and Conflictor. Conflictor is basically a Masochism, but instead of health, it gives opponents power. It's kind of like we have Buffet and Masochism, and then we have Conflictor and Power Snack. Right, the trickiest fight here by far would be the Void, which pretty much kind of disables you from using Suicide Masteries unless you manage to ramp up Aegon on the first fight against Quake, which actually is quite tricky. I tried a couple of times, I failed, and then I just kind of gave up on the idea because I wanted to just plow forward. I ended up using Warlock. Now, the fight was obviously longer because of Physical Perfection, but Warlock is double immune and has access to bleed, so he worked out relatively alright. The damage decrease wasn't as noticeable, so that is definitely a worthwhile option there as well. Other than that, you can obviously use Blade, especially if you're not running the Suicide Masteries or Nick Fury or whoever else you please. The cool thing about Conflictor is that just like Masochism, you can largely disable its effects if you keep consistently inflicting debuffs on opponent. Other than that, you do need to be aware how to play around the fact that they will be shrugging off your debuffs, just like you were learning how to play around Masochism. You need to know the reparry, ideally, or at the very least, you need to know when your parries will not stick and things like that. But again, champions that inflict a lot of debuffs, like Black Widow Deadly Origins, like Nick Fury, like Elsa Bloodstone, like Blade even, will work very good for this lane in general, especially if they have access to bleed. So even, I don't know, flex out your Squirrel Girl once in a while. I personally just used like double Nick Fury for most of this stuff, but I do understand that not everybody has access to that. Now, rest of the fights are relatively straightforward. Honestly, it's like Miss Marvel, Tiger, Captain Marvel, Captain America, Infinity War, and She-Hulk. Very straightforward, simple fights. Not much to discuss there. It's just the Void and Quake that can be somewhat annoying. And the path on the left side would actually be very awesome and really, really fun, except if it wouldn't be for this Rising Sun combination with Rogue. Now, Rising Sun is basically a very shitty version of Icarus, where instead of degeneration debuffs and actually potent furies, you get very, very weak furies and passive degeneration. So it's like a worse version of Icarus for the player, and I really dislike it, but you can go up to 10 furies. However, if you go past that, obviously you can start degenerating, which is very annoying. Other nodes are Tech Wrath, Overlocked, and Power Shield. So basically you want to use Tech Champions, and you want to get to a level 2, and then that level 2 will be lights out for most of the opponents. At the same time, you want to keep an eye out for Furies from Rising Sun. Now, that still doesn't sound too bad, but the craziest and the worst thing here is Rogue, because most of the champions will be unable to land their heavy attack, because Rogue shrugs up debuffs quicker, and I actually struggled with this fight quite a bit. There is a good solution, however, and let me introduce you to that solution, and that will be first to have Guardian in your team, and alongside Guardian, ideally you want to have this On Guard 3 synergy. Now I will need to expand this screen a bit so you guys can see, but one of the champions that do trigger that synergy is Squirrel Girl. And if you add in Squirrel Girl, your first 3 blocks will have 100% chance to be a perfect block, and that will also give you a significant increase to your parry stun duration, and that will be more than long enough to land a heavy attack. Now keep in mind that it is only the first 3 blocks, therefore you will have to kind of like work with intercepts and only block when you do intend to drop a heavy attack. But it is a very, very useful tool to work around this Rogue's quick shrug off mechanic and do not die from the Rising Sun. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very annoying. I know that I was frustrated initially. as I was going through that lane, and this fight in particular was very annoying. After that, there is nothing really to worry about. Now we do have this Symbiote Spidey, which is probably the hardest boss because the node combinations make it very, very annoying, for the lack of a better word. The reason why it is so annoying is because you have Hard Knock Life combined with Backward Brawler, both of whom are nodes that significantly increase the block damage. So every hit, every time you parry, you will feel it. And on top of that increased block duration, obviously every 11th parry opponent will be unblockable. That can catch you. But you do have this Raising Sun node that basically forces you to parry and get rid of those furies. For most part, I just kind of like wrestled through the node using Warlock and Hulkbuster, parry heavy. Keep in mind that Backward Brawler, no, but Bubble Shield, I think, or whichever one, the one that made them go unblockable. But yeah, I just largely did the parry heavy thing, and if I didn't solo the guy, I didn't solo the guy. The best option by far for this fight in particular, I believe, is probably Falcon. But even using Falcon, be careful, because, well, obviously, even though you do have the damage increase from Skill Breath, there is still that the best defense, which gives their evade abilities increased ability accuracy, and that means that even with lock on, he will still be able to evade. So that's quite frustrating. Other than that, alternative decent strategy is to bring in Nick Fury and just kind of go ham and use the fact that you have 2 lives available to you. And another option I think that should work relatively well should be Night Rusher. But other than that, just keep in mind this is an annoying boss, and if you don't one-shot it, then just bring in the next champion. And ideally, you want to use champions who can just parry heavy and very slowly get this fight done and down. Right, let's move on to the next quest. I do want to hurry up a bit. I have already spent 12 minutes, but hopefully we can go through quest 4 a bit quicker, as at the very least the boss is not as troublesome and annoying as the previous one. Right, so we're going to start with the right side, where we have Physical Perfection, Flare, Heavy Assault, and Stun Vulnerability. And this is actually a fairly quick, straightforward, easy path. Parry heavy, and you're going to be doing insane amount of damage. Now, ideally, you want to use the skill champions, because all other classes reduce the damage basically by 50%. But with Flare, with Stun Vulnerability, with Heavy Assault, you're going to be doing some very, very crazy numbers there. Obviously, there is more though, so Stun Vulnerability isn't going to work there too much. The biggest thing to note here will be the Immortal Abomination, but honestly, I just blitzed through him with like a highly ranked skill champion regardless, because that is how high of a damage increase you have. This is kind of a path but that's designed for you to basically run through it. And don't slow down, don't think, just parry heavy, parry, be aggressive, and things will die. Right, now we have this composite construction, Stack Overflow, Hard Knock Life 4. And this is actually very, very tricky path. And what makes it tricky is this Hard Knock Life, especially in fight against Iron Man Infinity War. The rest of the fights aren't as bad, but this one was actually very, very hard. The reason for it is because against Iron Man Infinity War, you do typically end up taking a lot of hits in the block, because you can't be too aggressive, or he can auto block, and on top of that, you can't parry him straight away, and you need to basically re-parry or block bait heavy attacks, and all of that stuff gives you disorient debuffs, and disorient debuffs increase the block damage. I did manage to get him down like a Warlock, but it took my rank 3 6-star Warlock who had Suicide Masteries active from 100% health to about 5% health, I think, or something like that. So it is a very hard fight that you definitely do need to be aware of, that you're going to end up taking a ton of block damage. And in general, on this lane, obviously you do want to use your tech champions, but at the same time, you're going to be taking a lot of damage. So my personal option here, once again, is use the fact that we have this stack overflow. Each additional tech champion extends the debuffs on the opponent by 10%, and try to stun lock most of these opponents with Hulkbuster or Stark Enhanced Spider-Man. And thanks to that, you will avoid unnecessary block damage in further fights there. So that would kind of be my recommended suggestion for most part. Now the fight in the middle, counter-strike, aggressive, bubble shield. You can use either champions. Nothing really gets a very big attack increase by anything. You do have to go up against Guardian. Do remember that most of his abilities do not work if he's armor broken. So Howard the Duck and Hulkbuster will work perfect for this guy. And Warlock is something to be aware of. If you are running Willpower Mastery or Suicide Masteries, then you will definitely want to get rid of this guy as quickly as you can. Otherwise, you're just going to be in a hell of a situation where your power gets drained and you degen constantly. And we also have obviously mandatory Nick Fury. If you do suffer from that pre-fight bug, you might get lucky where he starts in his second life. Other than that, you're obviously going to have to kill him twice. And due to bubble shield, once again, be careful on every 11th parry. It is going to be unblockable, but against Nick Fury, when he goes stun immune, that isn't typically the most viable strategy either. But overall, it's fairly open. Just use your biggest, strongest champions and you'll do fine. On the left side, these are the easy paths. Now, you do want to use tech champions once again. Arc Overload, Overlocked, and Stack Overflow. Both of the left side nodes have exactly the same requirements. The choice here is basically either you want to fight Havoc and have an armor buff, but due to Overlocked and Stack Overflow, you're probably using tech champions anyway. So once again, Howard the Duck, Hulkbuster, Warlock, even Guardian will do just fine here. And on this path, the thing to worry about is Yellow Jacket, because after his rework, if he ever goes into his meltdown mode or whatever it's called, just stay away from him. Honestly, it's trouble. You do not want to parry, you do not want to hit him, you do not want to hit his block, and you do not want him to touch you in any capacity. So just wait it out. Very, very important, or you can die immediately. Other than that, the encounters are relatively straightforward, most annoying one being probably this Mephisto further on. But if you do not have Guardian, which can basically deal with the guy relatively well once he regains his armor buff, use Hulkbuster or Stark Enhanced Spider-Man or Warlock. Basically, the champions who have single hit heavy attacks will work very, very well here, because that is a good way how to make sure that you are not attacking him when his Aura of Incinerate is on. So you just parry heavy, check if the Aura activates. If it doesn't, parry heavy again. If it does, stay away till it expires and just kind of slow play through the fight. And the boss. The boss is not too bad. It's Spider-Gwen, but it's fairly open. There are no real restrictions. There is the bubble shield, and that is about it. So the thing to be aware of when fighting bubble shield is that every 11th hit lets Spider-Gwen go unblockable, and the fact that she has evade. Obviously, you can bring in champions that directly counter evade, and that is largely going to be the skill class, either Elsa or Night Rusher or Nick Fury, or, well, many of them. But perfectly viable strategy is here, exactly the same one that you used for Mephisto. Parry heavy, make sure you do not hit her unless she's stunned. Every 11th hit is going to be unblockable, and just dex out of that one, and it really isn't too bad of a boss compared to that Symbiote Spidey. And that is about it. If you do have any more questions, please do feel free to ask. But yeah, this is a quite limited chapter, largely because, yeah, as I said, there are only 15 tech heroes, of whom half are borderline unusable, and skill class kind of comes in to save the day, but it's not really enough to kind of like compensate for that. And the bigger problems in this chapter is the fact that there aren't many great champions rather than the nodes themselves. Sorry, when I say not many great champions, I mean not many great options for the task at hand. And yeah, it did feel very specific that for most part I just ended up bringing in double Nick Fury for everything, just because there are no many champions that you would want to use. But yeah, that is about it, and as promised, tomorrow I will upload Chapter 3 Exploration Guide, so if this video was helpful to you at all in any capacity, please do me a huge favor. I'll greatly appreciate if you gently tap that like button, perhaps share it with your alliance, and do that other cool YouTube stuff. That being said, I'm gonna catch you guys soon. See ya! Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. have all the information